as it was written in the House would actually do. First of all, it's important to note that we're already, as I think everybody knows, starting with a really large deficit. Our deficit is almost $2 trillion right now. While it's projected to go down slightly, it would otherwise then keep climbing up to about between $2 and $2.5 trillion. That's if we do nothing. The big beautiful bill, you can look at two ways. As it is written, it would do this, so it would have the budget deficit still higher than we have. But there are a bunch of gimmicks in there in terms of making things expire that aren't really going to end up expiring. And so I think the real way to look at this big, beautiful bill is it would take the deficit out to $3 trillion in 2035. And that becomes a huge amount. And then you see what it does to the debt. So right now we're sitting here with $37 trillion of debt. Compared to a GDP, the whole size of our economy is only 30 trillion, meaning our debt is bigger than our economy. That's the only other time this has happened was in World War II. So we're starting with a huge debt load. And then no matter really what you do, because the deficit stays high, no matter what you do, the big, beautiful bill makes it worse. You could end up out here with $55 trillion of debt. So the debt growing faster than the economy, this becomes unsustainable, and this is what the deficit hawks are really focused on.
And Steve, already bigger than the economy is the national debt, and this would just add to that, as you say. This is a large conversation, I know, but just briefly, what are the risks to a debt that is larger than the economy?
Well, what you've seen happen in the last few weeks as this bill has been moving through Congress is periodic spurts of interest rates moving up. The federal government has to sell this debt periodically. It rolls over, it matures, they have to go out in the market and sell it. And the risk is that we pay higher and higher interest rates for our debt. And that in turn, as we'll look at in a few charts, squeezes out other kinds of spending and puts inordinate pressure on our debt and forces some really, really unpleasant things. At some point, reversing tax cuts when the market says it's enough, we're not going to keep financing these kinds of deficits. It's really a burden we're leaving to our children and our grandchildren, and that is an incredibly selfish act that we're doing.
All right, speaking of tax cuts, let's look to your second chart. These are, in your words, absolutely massive tax cuts, dwarfing anything we saw from the first Trump administration.
Yeah, so this bill, again, there's a bunch of gimmicks in it. You can look at it as a $2.4 trillion bill. You can look at it as a $4 trillion increase to the deficit. But compare it to all the stuff we've done in the last few years. The bipartisan infrastructure law looks puny compared to this. The rescue plan, half the size of this. The CARES Act, which was Trump's COVID rescue plan, $1.7 trillion. And here, Trump's signature tax bill from his first administration, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, $1.5 trillion. So compared to his last tax cut, we're talking about something that is massively different. Why is it so big?
Whoa.
He wants to extend all the tax cuts that were set to expire in the last bill. This was the gimmick in the last bill. They use these gimmicks to make these bills look smaller because then they come back and extend the tax cut, increase the standard deduction, increase the child tax cut. And then these are a bunch of campaign promises that Trump made sort of out of nowhere in states and in places where it would be politically advantageous. No tax on overtime, no tax on car loan interest, no tax on tips and so forth. They want to increase defense spending. He promised no taxes on Social Security for seniors. You can't do that through this process, but he came up with a workaround to basically provide the same thing. And then there are the cuts. And this is what Elon Musk is on about, rescinding the IRA climate funds. This is the EV tax credit in here. And these are the Medicaid cuts, $700 billion, which have not only gotten criticism from Democrats, but even Republicans like Josh Hawley, a very conservative Republican, has said this can't happen. And so, as we talked about in the last block, you've got people on both sides of this pushing in different directions, which is going to make this unbelievably difficult to get through the Senate. And then it has to go back to the House and be reconciled with the bill that they passed.
As you say, that last line, Medicaid cuts, is going to be a big problem. Let's go to your third chart. You say debt is difficult to tame. What are you looking at there?
Well, why did Elon Musk fail so spectacularly? The president had talked during the campaign about cutting $2 trillion. Elon talked about cutting $1 trillion. The final number is probably less than 150 billion, maybe 100 billion. And by the way, yes, people are dying because of that. That's been now well documented. But the reason it's so hard to cut is because so much of the budget is kind of off limits. Nobody wants to cut Medicare. Nobody wants to cut Social Security. You can't cut interest, obviously. People want to increase defense. Veterans benefits, probably not. Food stamps, maybe a little bit, something there. And then, of course, you have the Medicaid piece down here. But everything else that's left out of a $7 trillion budget is only about $1 trillion. You can't cut $2 trillion out of $1 trillion. You can't cut $1 trillion out of $1 trillion. And so that's why when Doge got in there, they found there really wasn't very much to do. But let's just say a word of what could have been, because we've now had 25
This
years
is
of
the
basic
important
fiscal
part.
irresponsibility, going back to the Bush tax cuts in 2001. And so if we had not increased discretionary spending faster than the economy, we could have increased it, just not as fast as we did. If we had not had all these tax bills, the Bush tax cuts and then the TCJA and so forth, the recession response, you could say we really had to do, but it costs a lot of money. But in any event, if we had not done this stuff, we still would have had a government that was growing, and we would have ended up in 2021 with essentially no debt. This was the missed opportunity. Now, because so much of the spending is constrained, now because we're paying so much interest, it's impossible to do something like this.
Morning, Joe. Economic analyst Steve Ratner, thank you very much for being on this morning for those explanations. Moving on now, several family members of a man accused of using a makeshift flamethrower to attack a group of people in Colorado.